Good afternoon, we are live now.
Good afternoon, and welcome to this webinar titled Guide to Successful Fiber Business Models. This session is organized by the FTTH Council Europe, and we are a trade association with a mission to advance full fiber-based connectivity in Europe. We regroup 150 member companies representing the full FTTH value chain, from vendor to operators and investors. Our webinar series consists of recurring online events where experts are happy to share insights about FTTH technologies, markets, and strategies. Our next event will take place on July the 13th and will detail results of a global study undertaken by other fiber councils on the consequences of home working. You can check on our website for more information. So before I introduce you to the speakers of today's webinar, let me just share some practical information. We are recording this session and you will have access to a link which will bring you to the replay. We will also share with you after this call a link to download the white paper and access the full guide which are presented today. All attendees are muted, but you can pose questions during the session by using the dedicated section on the platform. So do not hesitate to ask questions. Our panel will address them at the end of the webinar. We have secured some time for this. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our speakers. Starting with Florian Damas, Head of Policy and Regulatory Affairs at Nokia. Florian, as chair of the investor committee of the FTTH Council Europe, has coordinated the creation of the guide we are releasing today. Florian will be joined during the Q&A session by Yves Blondel, Managing Director at T-Rex, and by Kim Vernecke, Relationship Manager at Hamburg Commercial Bank. Both Yves and Kim have been closely associated with the development of this content. And now, Florian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Vincent. So first, before we start, let me remind you that you may ask questions in the questions box in the GoToWebinar window or application, and we will have a Q&A after the presentation of the guide. So about the aim of the guide, we have focused in the guide on successful business models that are characterized by private financing. So their shareholders and bondholders are typically private companies, although public financing is also an element in some of them. We cover both fiber to the home and fiber to the office. We identify key financial de-risking features of this model. For example, what does it take to lower the risks for investors to commit early and scale up the business? What does it take to private financiers to say, I am confident enough to spend billions on fiber rollout to achieve geographic coverage? We have described European companies that are representatives of the business models described in the guide. We present in detail in the report the private financiers, the equity side of the shareholders, where we see a trend from venture capitalists to infrastructure funds. We have listed the banks and consortia of banks providing debt to these companies. Our focus is deliberately on the role of private financiers. We have mentioned public funding where it is a factor. The titles of the following 8 models are our own terminology and aim to describe key characteristics. The first model is called retail consumer demand aggregation. This is the idea that a fiber operator builds a company and defines an original plan covering a number of towns or cities and asks people in that geography, would you like to sign up to become a customer of my fiber network and make an upfront commitment as a retail customer? But before, they talk to the municipal authorities and seek to have the necessary permits for a very fast rollout, which will be kicked off once the commitment has been reached. The example company for Model 1 is named Dutch Glasfaser in Germany. Their threshold is a figure of 40% of customers to sign upfront before building a network. In about 85% of small municipalities, there is a sufficient number of customers who agree to sign up for a contract of 24 months. And on the basis that local authorities provide the necessary permits, networks are built out and the services are delivered on the retail market. The company has also a wholesale activity like all the other representative companies we present in the guide. Dutch Glasfaser is becoming a big company. It is building over 6 million fiber to the home connections in Germany, has raised 7 billion euros of private capital to do so, and has secured 1 billion in public funds. We focus on Model 1 on the retail side as a key characteristic. Model 2 is the wholesale anchor tenant model. A company decides to build fiber networks, typically in secondary cities, and tries to find a couple of wholesale customers to make a commitment to guarantee, once the network is built, to take wholesale services. The example we have given here is CityFibre, which is covering 60 cities in UK and has secured Vodafone, which is a major fixed and mobile operator, to make a long-term commitment to take up 20% of the lines of their network. At the same time, CityFibre brought in TalkTalk as a second wholesale fiber to the home access customer, taking the total FTTH rollout plan to 8 million homes passed by 2025. This also entails CityFibre moving more broadly to an open wholesale model without hard exclusivity agreements. Also in 2020, CityFibre signed a long-term deal with the mobile network operator 3 for dark fiber for the purposes of backhaul and a possible extension to small cell backhaul. As of March 2021, CityFibre has 14 wholesale access takers signed up. The third model is the pure wholesale-only model, and the representative company is Open Fiber in Italy. It is a company which decides to roll out fiber in many cities, major and secondary ones throughout the country. It basically says we are open to wholesaling to any broadband company on the consumer and business markets, including connecting data centers, any mobile backhaul, etc. It lays down a plan and it secures these customers on a clear commitment that it will stay as a wholesale company and will not compete with them on the retail market. It tries to attract a wide portfolio of wholesale customers, and in some cases, even the incumbent operator to some extent. There is a lot more going on in Italy, but that is the part we wanted to present in relation to this model. In this report, we also talk about the ultra-rural areas, so-called white areas, where Open Fiber was the winner of tenders to serve those areas. Model 4 focuses on meeting high quality and high reliability demand. This is not only about fiber to the business, but also fiber to the office, fiber to the hospitals, fiber to the universities, and fiber to data centers. It also covers connecting wholesale access points, like base stations, and interconnection points. The representative company is Eurofiber. It is the oldest company we have interviewed in this guide, which is 22 years old. It has 2 key mobile operator customers in the Netherlands out of 3. It has built a selective network, mainly in urban and metropolitan areas, in business parks, where there is a demand for high capacity and reliability connections up to 1 terabit per second. It serves both retail and wholesale markets. Eurofiber is also significant as it has internationalized. It has presence in multiple countries in Europe. Reliance on public funds is typically non-existent or very low, given that the market addressed is willing and able to pay for the specific type of fiber connections delivered on commercial terms. Model 5 is the vertically integrated incumbent telco, such as Altice in Portugal. The incumbent telco was taken over by another investor, Altice Europe, in 2015. Altice Portugal is notable for initiating a rapid and large-scale copper to fiber transition. Its decision to invest in fiber and to roll it out rapidly and ubiquitously was triggered by the requirement placed upon it to spin off its hybrid fiber coax network in 2007. It has achieved now well over 90% of the lines which have become fiber. Its copper shutdown is really close on the horizon as its full national coverage. Significantly, the company has sold off 50% minus one share of its fiber network to financial investors in the form of a private equity fund, which we will come back to. Model 6 refers to the minority co-financing model. We focused on the operator free in France, which has more than 20% of the fixed broadband market and 27% of the FTTH retail customers. It's a major fixed and mobile broadband player on the French market. We describe in the guide what it has done. It has built its own fiber network in limited areas, but it comes in as the minority co-financer of third-party networks. In particular, the network of Orange France, but also the networks of concession holders, which we will describe in the next model. Basically, it buys portions of 5, 10, 15, or 20%, but very often 20%, where it basically says, I will give you 20% of the money you need to lay down the fiber network, if in exchange you give me indefeasible rights of use, what we call IRUs, for 40 years, to do whatever I want with a fiber network, to serve any types of customers and any other activities. This model is influenced by the French government policies and regulation. Model 7 is the concession by public authority. It's a model which exists in multiple countries, such as France and Sweden. Here we describe mainly the French model with the representative company Altitude Infrastructure. The French government has split the territory in different areas where they think the commercial market will take care of itself and fiber will be rolled out. Areas where it is clear there will be no business-driven development, where there is no prospect for a private investor or multiple networks to be rolled out, they have followed the local and regional authorities to issue exclusive concessions to try to attract somebody to build a fiber to the home network and fiber to everything, in particular geographic areas. What has emerged over the years is a number of companies that are specialized in becoming builders of these concession networks. Altitude Infrastructure being one of them. They have become big companies under this model. In the early years of development of the concession model in France, local and regional authorities typically provided significant amounts of public funding to concession holders, under the system in which the bidder demanding the lowest public subsidy wins the concession. Since 2019, given that strong competition has emerged from well-established private companies, such as Axione, Altitude Infrastructure, TDF, XP Fiber, as well as Orange France, to win concessions, the winning bids are for zero public subsidy. The model has become so successful and stable that networks can be built without public subsidy. That is an important learning point for other countries as well. The last model described in the guide is Model 8, represented by Iner in Poland, which focuses on ultra-rural areas where it is the only provider. It identifies large clusters of very rural areas, typically small villages and low-density areas with scattered population, where availability of fixed broadband is limited. For example, where copper loop lengths are too long to provide any broadband connectivity, or to support higher speeds XDSL variants, or where there is no hybrid fiber coax network. This corresponds to what is often referred to as white areas, where the business case for FTTH may be difficult. It focuses on the retail and the wholesale markets via separate divisions. It builds a FTTH access network to serve rural and remote areas, accompanied by a backbone network in order to bring traffic to aggregation points in the capital city and perhaps a few other cities. This is essential to attract wholesale customers, which would otherwise have limited ability and an interest in serving rural and remote areas, and eases their decision to take wholesale access. It also avoids a situation in which other operators overbuild the backbone segment. That is the line of the 8 stylized business models and their representative companies. Now the presentation will focus on the conclusions of the report and the lessons we can learn from studying these models. But before we dive into the conclusions, just to share with you the content of the guide. For each of the 8 business models, the stylized description contains the geographic area and scope, market positioning in terms of is it retail, wholesale markets? Does it include other types of markets like mobile backhaul? There will be also key financial de-risking features, such as securing retail and wholesale upfront contract commitments. We also provide information about capital and financing. And we list a simple European company corresponding to each specific business model. We provide geography and metrics, the company history, the services they deliver, the type of network architecture, and their choices in terms of technology over fiber, and in some cases where it makes sense, the role of national regulations. We also provide profiles of private financiers. Now, let's come to the conclusions. The companies we present are financed build-out machines which secure their financing to build out more. Each company is doing it on a very large scale at a rapid pace. They are clustering projects in geographic areas. It is not like they focus on an area and then expand. What we see are companies selecting areas such as cities, villages, towns, and putting them together in a single business project. It is not necessarily the case to go for homogeneous areas for build-outs. If we take together the 8 companies of this guide, we see there are already about 20 million fiber to the homes passed. And if we include minority co-financing, which is the operator free in France, the figure is over 40 million homes passed. All of these companies have tangible plans, funding fully in place from their shareholders and from their debtors to reach over 45 million homes by end 2025, which could go up to 75 million if we add the minority co-financing there as well. Even in the meantime, these plans are still being accelerated, and we may expect higher numbers at the end of 2025 compared to what is presented here because of further boosters are being put on demand. What we see is that private financing models have become the norm for urban areas, but also rural areas. This is a strong conclusion that we are reaching, is that private financing is fundamental and that we are no longer in a perspective where public funding is absolutely needed for deploying fiber in less dense areas. We also see that private equity infrastructure funds, meaning financial institutions which are specialized in funding other infrastructures, such as railways, ports, toll roads, hospitals, and other very long-term business plans with guaranteed recurring revenues, are moving in the fiber business as they have understood that it is a stable business with long-term returns and clear predictability. All this means that the market has been considerably de-risked. The money that these private equity funds, which is in part their own money, but actually to a very large proportion pension funds from third-party organizations, are investing in those private equity funds and invest many billions in fiber projects. We also see banks providing large amounts of debt via loans, bonds, etc., directly, but most often through consortia, and we have listed them in the guide. We see several cases where it is more than 10 banks, and in one case more than 15 banks, which come together and put several billions, and in one case more than 4 billion euro to provide funding of a very ambitious fiber project in Italy with open fiber. These banks are either global or regional, which take a real interest in the geography where it's happening. Therefore, we see consortia coming together with different bank profiles. On the keys to financial de-risking, we have listed 3 of them, which are straight to the point. The first one is upfront contractual commitments. The second one is exclusive concessions awarded by tenders by public authorities. And the third one is the role of getting wholesale customers. The upfront commitment can be at the retail demand at aggregation level. The network is only built at a certain proportion of customers, which will sign to commit. We have put here minimum 30%, as it has been the threshold used by certain companies in certain countries we have interviewed. Some companies, such as Dutch Glasfaser, have even higher thresholds. The 30% figure is more as the stylized business model. The wholesale anchor tenant of City Fiber, where they attracted Vodafone and mobile operators upfront for long-term contracts. Signing wholesale customers for long-term contributes to de-risking the project. It is also trending to open fiber networks to wholesale. And then we have minority co-financing, where somebody takes the initiative and another operator will add another 20% of money up, which corresponds more or less to its market share. This allows to de-risk the project for both operators. We see exclusive concessions, for example, in France, Portugal, and Sweden, where the subsidies are decreasing as the market is getting mature. We see that 4 out of 8 models are trending towards wholesale as their primary or sole activity. Now a few words on density area, and the colors that you see on the slide are there to explain and to highlight the countries. Many of the businesses we have profiled have reached a level of predictability because they have the scale and the quasi-assured revenues for the long run, and indeed, in some cases, real contractually assured revenues. This enables also the low density areas to be built out, and it's happening based on private funds. Let's highlight our examples. Model 1 in Germany with the retail demand aggregation. We see that wholesale has become more important on that model, and that it is focused on smaller towns and villages in Germany. It represents many billions of investment and received 1 billion of public funding, with a successful focus not on cities but towns. Model 1 is overwhelmingly based on private funds. We see in Model 5, the Portuguese model, where the incumbent is deploying fiber in the whole country, and there is a few other wholesale companies focused, which are completing the nationwide coverage based on the tender system which occurred in the past. About models 6 and 7, which are French models, minority co-financing and concessions, they are really pushing now to cover rural areas. At the end of 2025, we will have de facto nationwide fiber coverage based on the combination of French models. The point about public funding trending to zero is the case in Portugal and France. The public funds remain important levers. In Model 1, with Dutch Glasfaser in Germany. In Model 3, in Italy with open fiber, where the Italian government issues tenders for covering the so-called white areas, and the wholesale company Open Fiber was able to win all of those tenders, notably because it was focused on the wholesale market, which would maintain a level of competition on the service layer in those areas. In Model 8, Iner, the company we have profiled, received about 85% of its capex to build out those fiber networks and received public funding for the build of the backhaul to the cities so operators can get access there. Nationwide coverage is within reach now of countries like Portugal and France for the end of 2025. For other countries like Germany, UK, or Belgium, they are still behind. Now about the clear commonalities between all these business models. Securing solid recurring revenue streams is key to attracting investors. It is the model of discounted cash flow. That is how you finance a company when you know that over time it will have enough money to cover its investment and that it will be on the path to clear profitability. On the retail demand aggregation and upfront retail contracts, just to say that on Model 4, which is the focus on high quality and high reliability demand, Eurofiber is focused on the business-to-business market. And even on Model 1, Dutch Glasfaser, since it acquired Inexio, shows an increased interest in wholesale. Getting major wholesale customers and even getting all the wholesale customers is prevalent in all the models listed in the guide, except for Model 5, which is the vertically integrated model represented by Altice in Portugal. Everybody is focusing on wholesale and trying to make sure to get as many as possible and hopefully all the wholesale customers. They are trying really hard to have the incumbent telco as part of their customers. Mobile backhaul and data centers are always kind of the part of the plan as well. It is clear that Open Fiber in Italy, Dutch Glasfaser in Germany, and City Fiber in UK are enablers of the transition from copper to fiber. Various incentives are actually in place to make the transition smooth and fast for the fiber companies to have a quick path to profitability and expansion of their networks. Having a pre-existing important position on retail markets, so being a big ISP or a big broadband provider, is obviously important as well in terms of having recurring revenue streams. That is the case when you are the incumbent, like Altice in Portugal, when you are the operator free in France, when you have about 20% of fixed and mobile markets. Let's look at the second set of commonalities. Fiber to everything outlined by Altice in Portugal, where the commitment is very clear from them since 2007 to build a fiber network not just for consumer broadband, but to make sure you can serve all kinds of businesses and public administrations, that you are able to go to the data centers, that you connect over 95% of Altice base stations of its mobile network, and that you are ready for next generations of technologies, such as 5G to connect all the mobile cells. Nearly all of our companies, except Eurofiber, have built point-to-multipoint architecture in a way that they can also deliver point-to-point connections with the necessary feeder capacity in the network to serve other kinds of needs, including data centers and high-end business customers. Such fiber architecture takes everything into account to deploy fiber to everything. All models aim to reach customer centricity and excellence. What we have seen historically is that the incumbent telco was required by regulation to give wholesale access to its copper network to its competitors. It did not like that. So it did not provide really great services and tried to deny or refuse or sometimes even degraded the experience. So the relationship between the incumbent telco and its competitors is typically not a very good one. We see the fiber companies have been able to come on the market by providing faster speeds than XDSL and hybrid fiber coax networks, and superior quality, meeting latent or explicit needs of retail and wholesale customers. They also have a non-adversarial relationship with wholesale customers. In other words, ensuring clarity that the provider will not compete on retail markets. In some cases, contractually guaranteed explicit non-discrimination of wholesale customers where the provider is present on both retail and wholesale markets is offered. One commonality is avoiding or averting local access network competition where possible. by avoiding build-out in areas already served by hybrid fiber coax networks, and by granting wholesale access on attractive terms to avoid that the new fiber networks are overbuilt by the telecom incumbent or by others. Another commonality is offering co-financing by minority investors and or entering into minority co-financing deals, represented by models 6 and 7, and a sale of proportion of the fiber infrastructure or of a stake in a special purpose company to infrastructure investors under model 5 and 6. Now, the ambition and the ability to scale up and industrialize to become a building machine is essential for securing private long-term investors, specifically clustering smaller projects, meaning fiber builds in many tens or hundreds of villages, or multiple cities and city areas into one or multiple bankable projects worth tens or hundreds of millions of euros, or even billions, is what has driven the success of the companies profiled in this guide. We see the clustering of multiple types of geographical areas that have similar characteristics, but we don't see one homogeneous geographic area today. Perhaps we could see at a later stage market consolidation with merger and acquisitions, but for now, what prevails is homogeneity of geotypes rather than homogeneity of territories. And then we see in two cases, Altis in Portugal and Free in France, which have actually sold a fiber company that they created in part to specialized fiber investors. Altis sold half of the share minus 1 share, and Free sold everything plus, well, half of the shares plus 1 share. The one has the minority, the other one has the majority at the end, and each raised over €1 billion from making those sales. This model is similar to what is happening in the mobile space, where companies like Cellnex and American Towers and others are buying the mobile mats of the mobile operators because they are better at running this infrastructure and attracting other operators. We would not be surprised to see other fiber companies following this path by creating specialized fiber companies that are obviously wholesale only and are committed to operate the network separately from any retail market, which are attractive to financial investors, which clearly see the path on return without any destruction. It also helps retail companies to deliver itself from paying some debts by the money they got from selling their fiber assets, and perhaps use that money for further expansion. This is the last slide on commonalities. We will now focus on some specific points. Some models described appear to be converging with one another over time. For instance, the wholesale anchor tenant approach, whereby a strong upfront commitment is made by one or a few wholesale access takers, is and remains highly relevant. But once successful, it trends towards a more regular wholesale-only model, where a wide range of wholesale access takers is actively pursued. City Fiber, which represents Model 2, has opened to other customers in the wholesale front and has renegotiated its exclusive deals with anchor tenants to become a wholesale provider to anybody. Business models are both refining and developing over time, with some models increasing in relevance as they are more widely adopted and financed to enable massive scale. Under Model 1, Dutch Glasfaser is widening its B2B business and wholesale activities. Under Model 4, over the years, Eurofiber acquired companies in the Netherlands, Belgium, and France, such as the Dutch Regional Business Fiber Networks, the Belgian Railroads Fiber Network, data centers, and data center connectivity companies in France. Two announcements occurred after we did the interview. One is an agreement with Proximus in Belgium for fiber to the home. Another is the establishment with Vattenfall of a Berlin-based joint venture to provide fiber to the home and fiber to the office. The roles of the national governments, the national regulatory authorities, and municipal rules for rights of way are often very important. In some countries, notably France and Poland, as represented in models 6, 7 and 8, policies and regulations are a driver for specificities of the business models that are described. Example, minority co-financing, concession models, scope of state support. This can lead to a specific set of circumstances that is not readily replicable in other countries. Merger and acquisition activity is occurring in the fiber infrastructure sector and is likely to continue apace with clear consequences for business models and the companies pursuing them. What makes the most sense at the moment is in-country consolidation. We see the Eurofiber expanding outside of its country, now deploying networks in 3 other countries. Perhaps the M&A will also change. We are at a stage where private equity companies are buying and consolidating, but it could be in a few years' time large entities that will be quoted on the stock market and will be operating in multiple countries. Fiber companies are basically today national or even subnational, but already their investors are global. We see American, Swiss, and Australian funds investing in the European companies. We see consortia of banks from one country investing in other countries. We see a lot of diversity at the investor level. One open question is, will fiber companies in Europe become multi-country and multinational? So this is the end of the presentation, and we will now switch to the Q&A.
Yeah, thank you, Florian. Maybe before we start the Q&A, I've got a couple of slides to go through, which would give you extra minute to ask and write down question in the dedicated box on the platform. So thank you, Florian. Most of the content of the presentation Florian just went through is available within the white paper, which will be sent to you after this presentation. So that's a heads up. You will receive as a follow-up email access to this white paper. And if you can move to the next slide, Florian, we've also been referring to the full guide, and the full guide is actually a 70 pages long detailed description corresponding to the in-depth study which has been developed to prepare this presentation today. So the full guide will be made available to all FTTH Council Europe members and will be sold to non-members. So for any information, any interest in the full guide, please email us. We will take your request. An automated online purchasing process will be made available in a matter of days. So with that, I will move to the Q&A. We already have a few questions coming in, and I will ask the panelists to join me so the discussion can start around this question. I will probably start, gentlemen, with a question coming from Portugal, but I guess many people will have the same. There are 8 business models, and Joao is asking us, why did you focus only on Altice? I guess he refers to Altice Portugal, and not on the other very interesting operator in that country. So I guess maybe a word on how you selected the 8 model, the 8 company, and why do we limit ourselves to 8?
Thank you. I will address that. Yes, we are well aware of Fibro Global and of DST in Portugal, and in fact, they are mentioned in the full guide, including DST's recent capital raise. There was also a representative of that company in our panel in the previous conference, but so we are aware of it. It is not one of the 8 models. I think basically we have focused on models that were achieving very, very large scale and that had a certain level of, well, let's say scalability indeed. So we were looking at models that are running in the many millions of lines, and in some cases more than 10 million lines. So our focus was on very large projects. We are fully clear on the fact that there exist many more than 8 models, and I think we could easily double that number with some effort. So there are many more interesting cases. And we do think the Portuguese concession type models that were subject to public tenders about 10 years ago, or a bit more even, are really interesting and successful models. And they also reflect the fact that public subsidy was required initially, but is no longer required today, even to expand to less dense areas.
Okay. Thank you, Yves. I think it was a useful clarification. Question from Cornelius. You mentioned that increasingly private funding is really is covering any kind of FTTH deployment case, but are they areas, and which one, where public subsidies are more effective than private investment, or critical as opposed to private investment? Do you have specific example in mind?
I think I can take that as well, but Kim or Florian, if you want to come in. So our Model 8 describes a situation that is ultra-rural, where it is clear that state aid has been necessary and will remain necessary for expansion to areas where otherwise it is simply unrealistic for a commercial company with a private financier to act in that area. But let me emphasize that the company that receives the state aid in Poland, Iner, the one that we profiled, is a private company. It has as its investor an infrastructure fund with a clear track record in investing in other long-term infrastructure. And it is that private company that receives the state aid because it is necessary in that area to expand the area. So this is not the same as the state doing it itself, or a municipal network choosing to invest on its own with public money. And I can speak for myself here, but personally, I believe that if you want to achieve rapid coverage and the economies of scale necessary to reach a large-scale rollout, that giving the money to experienced entrepreneurs that know how to scale a company and that are backed by a private equity fund or by venture capitalists is really a way of getting things done on a large scale. And I think that's very important in terms of the lessons from the guide.
Okay, maybe a question to Kim, and maybe Kim, you can comment on what Yves has just said as well. But I have a question saying, okay, why is Germany apparently lagging behind Portugal or France? I guess the question relates more to the coverage of FTTH, but that's what I would like you to react to.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's a different framework in Portugal present with the forced copper shutdown, which is not yet envisaged in Germany. So, and as well, the Deutsche Telekom, which is state-owned partially, has received a lot of the state funds until 3 years ago for their FTTC, so fiber to the curb build out. And beside that, in the shadow of that, Deutsche Glasfaser was very successful building out, and they now have a successful build-up machine that is able to use its scale and is leveraging private money in order to get a good paced rollout there. So I think this is one of many points that lead to having different frameworks for the starting points, and basically losing years while funding the wrong model. Now it's speaking about FTTC compared to other countries like Portugal, who said, yeah, look, it's only going to be a matter of years when fiber is the king.
Okay, makes sense. And maybe another question for you, Kim, coming from Yusuf, asking, is there a minimum transaction size for financing FTTH project? So you come from a bank, Any idea of a threshold which start to make investment relevant?
I would say that it's like no real minimum. It really depends on how big you want to be. If you're having a startup and they have good management in place and a good equity portion in place, then maybe local saving banks are going to be able to provide small loans in order to facilitate their first project. And by growing, you can end up in wanting to capture more equity from experienced investors such as VC funds or maybe PE funds and later on infrastructure funds. And alongside the life cycle of the companies, you will also end up asking banks. So there are multilateral investment banks who are able to arrange large financings with consortia of banks. So I would really say that it's like no bare minimum. It really depends on how big you want to be. So have a brave plan.
Makes sense. Thanks very much, Kim. Question about the Belgium market, maybe to Florian or Yves. Can you please elaborate, says Bieke, on the Belgium situation in which Proximus is now rolling out fiber in specific cities? Will this be enough, or shall municipalities, cities, or more private initiative, spontaneously develop their own network in addition to the incumbents' activity? Anyone?
Florian?
Yves, please.
Okay, I'll take the question. It's clear that Proximus has made an announcement of a plan. The exact geographic scope of that plan, except the end of the plan, which is many, many years away, is not so well known. So I think there are some questions in my mind personally as to where things will happen and in what sequence and at what time, which could leave the opportunity open for another entity or a public entity to roll out the network. But obviously it's absolutely essential for any such entity thinking of a plan to be aware of whether and when Proximus, the incumbent telco, intends to cover that area with its own network, and whether that's next year or in 3 years or in 9 years. If you're going to be in a situation with a public network that might then find itself overbuilt by a private network, I think you may end up in a difficult situation, knowing also that Belgium is basically fully covered by hybrid fiber coax networks. So you would find yourself in a constellation with 3 networks. We also know that the market shares at the retail level of Proximus plus the cable companies is around 90%. So if those 2 companies are present in the same geography and you're the guy building the separate fiber network, I think that sounds pretty risky to me. Okay,
I understand. Thanks, Yves. I've got a nice comment from Hubertus. He is asking 2 questions. Have you looked outside of EU country? Maybe I can take this one. No, we haven't. It doesn't mean that it wouldn't bring some interest. At the FTTH Council, the committee, investor committee in charge of this study is open to suggestion, and that might be something we consider in the future as part of the action plan of this committee. Now, if I address the second question and bring that to you, do you see the interest or need to push for or encourage pan-European FTTH player with the idea that big is beautiful, big is more powerful, more efficient? Is there a scale effect for FTTH models?
I think I'll start and pass on to Kim. As we've explained and as Florian presented, today the market is subnational or national for fiber networks. it is not naturally obvious that scaling beyond national borders has a particular synergy or a particular advantage. So I think it would be more a financial transaction that would put multiple companies together in the same entity. But I don't think that there is a clear necessity or logical driver for a single champion to be the fiber network everywhere. And by the way, in the incumbent telco space, we've been talking about consolidation or potential trans-border mergers for many, many years. That has happened to a limited but not insignificant extent, but attempts at that or desires to do that have clearly not come to fruition. And you will find plenty of financial analyst reports that say cross-border acquisitions are probably not the wisest way to spend your capital at this time.
Kim?
Yeah, I'll follow on. I think the question here is rather the fiber to the home is the right one to be pan-European, because we already have companies that are active globally, such as SIO or CenturyLink and others who are providing dark fiber or wavelength services for the more local or regular regional ISPs, and being able to deliver fiber to the home. And in addition to that, it's probably hard for some of the investors to tackle multiple regulatory frameworks and different revenue schemes and customer contracts as long as they're not harmonized across Europe, and account for the different recurring values of those cash flows provided by this pan-European fiber to the home company then.
Okay, thank you.
I would like also to...
Yes, please, Florian.
I will take another angle to answer that question. I mean, there's this change of paradigm, you know, with fiber technologies which are coming to the market. We see already operators competing with XGS-PON, which is 10 gig symmetrical. Nokia has announced 25 gig symmetrical PON as well. And in the standards, you see all the features required actually to ensure synchronization to now this time use fiber access networks to connect 5G cells. And we see that through the different business models in the guide, there's an appetite for this. And what I see is the interest of the European Commission actually for cross-border networks, specifically for 5G mobile networks. But since actually 5G could now be, or I mean 5G cells could be connected from fiber access networks, maybe that could, you know, trigger in the future more pan-European networks deployed over fiber.
Thank you, Florian. Question from Jan about overbuilding, about competition on infrastructure between parallel infrastructure. The question is, what is the level of overbuild in Europe? And taking the example of the UK, is wondering whether having 3 or more FTTP networks in some area, does it really make sense to overbuild areas? So what is, how does it relate to the different business model, and what are your comments on this question?
I think we have seen very clearly, and this was expressed in Florian's presentation, that the operators are actively avoiding overbuild because that deeply would affect their payback time and even their potential for profitability at all. So measures are taken, one, to pick an area where you'll be the first and hopefully the only one. And secondly, then attracting the other companies with attractive wholesale terms to avoid that they decide to overbuild. Now, we are aware that there are areas with multiple fiber networks. They exist, and I think they exist in a reasonably stable fashion, even in some locations. But I think we're at least at a stage in the market development where many developers are looking for an exclusive position, and obviously financial investors such as private equity funds understand very well the value of having such an exclusive position, while at the same time facilitating the services of others over those networks. And I think in the UK, indeed, there is this phase of the market where we could come into a situation of overbuild, but I believe we're still in a situation where the jury is out on whether there will be more than 2 fiber networks in many locations in the UK.
Okay. I have several questions from Rodolphe, so I want to take one of these. Rodolphe is asking many questions, putting in parallel a mobile network versus fixed FTTH networks, and the relative benefits of the two type of access network in terms of sustainability. I don't think sustainability is really the topic of today. Nevertheless, may I take that opportunity to ask you whether in the different model, did you see any differences in the way FTTH network are leveraging relation with mobile operator and fiber backhauling as an opportunity for the business model, and how is FTTH network intertwined with mobile operator strategy for the backhauling of their fiber and of their 5G antennas, for example?
Maybe Florian, you can take that one.
Well, we see that there's more and more interest for the business models we have described to go towards wholesale. And wholesaling is not about providing, connectivity for residential or business customers, but fiber has the potential to do much more than that. And we see already operators, wholesalers, to use that, that what fiber can bring for other for delivering other services. So one is backhaul for sure. We see that with the deployment of 5G, we will deploy many more cells. We will have to connect cells from street furnitures as well. And the question is, what can we do? Should we have one fiber for each cell, or how can we find ways of actually connecting all these cells and lower the cost? So the question is now, should we have we come from the world where we had separate infrastructures, one for voice, one for data, whereas now with fiber, it's not only what we used to see like triple play or quad play, but now the opportunity as well to connect customers for as the IoT sector, to connect mobile networks as well. So there's a lot of potential and optimization to be done.
Thank you, Florian. I think I will take it from there. We are getting to the end of our session. I would like to thank all participants and especially all those who asked questions. I'm really sorry we cannot address all of them. There are still a dozen of them waiting to be addressed. But I would definitely invite you to download the white paper to get access to the full ebook. You can also contact us at the FTTH Council. This document is not the end of our contribution to the FTTH community and investor community. We will keep on developing content, trying to bring value to entrepreneurs, to operators, as well as investors, looking at how we best facilitate the rollout of fiber and its financing. So thank you very much. And with that, I wish you a very good end of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, bye-bye.